Greetings, beloved family, and thank you all once again for being here with us today on Occult Science Radio. I am Curtis Davis, aka the Illuminated One, and today we have with us an old family member. He is a scholar with regard to Egypt as well as ancient Egypt. He's given us many groundbreaking books, and I have his last book, Black Genesis. If you have not read Black Genesis yet, then you are really missing a Bible of information. And if you're not familiar with whom I'm referring to the incomparable Robert Bauval. Today, we're going to be discussing his new book, Imhotep. All right, the African, architect of the cosmos. And this is going to be a tremendous, tremendous show. So I'm going to start off by thanking our sponsor, the Occult Network. That's theoccultnetwork.com. And you can also find the Occult Network on Facebook. Yes, the Occult Network has a Facebook page. And you can also find the Occult Network on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And if you want to keep up with what's going on Occult Science Radio, you can also find me on Facebook as well, Curtis Illuminated One Davis. So come by, become a friend of mine, join the Occult Network Facebook page on YouTube, Twitter as well, and then you'll be totally in tune to what's going on with the Occult Network as well as Occult Science Radio. And don't forget, the Occult Network is now on Roku.com, so join us there as well. So yeah, going to want to call in for this one, family. Please call in at 646-649-1987. That's 646-649-1987. And if you have a question for our distinguished guest, Robert Bauval, don't forget to press number 1 on your keyboard so we can take your wonderful questions and comments. Now we are going to turn our attention to the new book by our good friend Robert Bauval, Imhotep the African, architect of the cosmos. Now, this groundbreaking book, Egyptologist Robert Bauval and his co-host, astrophysics, Dr. Thomas Brophy, who is also a past guest, together they uncover the mystery of Imhotep, an ancient Egyptian superstar, pharaonic, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo, and Newton all rolled into one. Now, based on their research at the Step Pyramid Complex at Saqqara, Robert Bauval and Dr. Brophy delve into observational astronomy to decode the alignments and other design features of the Step Pyramid Complex to uncover the true origins and genius of Imhotep. Like a whodunit detective story, they follow the clues that take them on an exhilarating magical mystery tour, starting at Saqqara, leading them to the temples in Upper Egypt, and to the stones of Nabta Playa, and the black African stargazers who placed them there. Imhotep the African describes how Imhotep was the ancient link to the birth of modern civilization, restoring him to his proper place at the center of the birthing of Egyptian and world civilization. This is going to be great. And with that, I welcome our good friend and brother, Robert Bauval. Robert, welcome once again, brother.
Hi, Curtis. It's a real pleasure to be on your show again.
Oh, yes. Always, always, always look forward to having you, brother. I mean, because every time we look up, you're coming out with another tremendous book and tremendous, tremendous information. And before we get started on Imhotep, your latest book, there's been some goings on in Egypt lately. And I've been following your post on Facebook because you're very in tune to what's going on over there. Just give us a brief synopsis on what's going on over in Egypt right now, and hopefully things are getting better over there. But what's going on? Is it good, bad, or, can we look forward to still visiting our sacred homeland?
Well, I'm very glad you asked me this. Perhaps I should jump on the opportunity to do a little bit of advertisement for my next book, which is going to be called Egypt Unveiled. It's a book that I am writing with the Egyptian journalist and author Ahmed Osman. You may remember that Ahmed and I wrote a book 2 years ago called Breaking the Mirror of Heaven, which dealt with the goings-on in Egypt, but we have decided to do a follow-up, mainly because, as you say, there's been quite a lot of goings-on in the last, in the last 2 years, really, but especially in the last 2 months. To give you an update, and I'm in contact, by the way, with people in Egypt, because I must say that it is a bit confusing sometimes to follow international media news. It's occurred to me lately that it depends on which channel you're watching. And there's a lot of bias and a lot of conflicting and opposing views, and with a lot of experts giving their opinions. Basically, it's a very complicated problem, but by speaking to people in Egypt, and I'm in contact with 3 or 4 very good friends who actually are in Cairo. Well, what happened is, as you know, about 2 months ago, they toppled the so-called Islamist government run by President Mohamed Morsi. A lot of people didn't quite understand this as to why the Egyptian people rose against what has been constantly called a democratically elected president, the very first ever in the history of Egypt. But to quote a phrase that has been said by the present interim president at the moment, he said, you know, the ballot is not the end of democracy. And if those who are elected do not perform and do not comply with the promises and the demands of the people, then the ballot is no good. So there's this idea that you know, that if you win elections, that's it. You know, you are entitled to do what you like. And this is unfortunately what did happen when the President Morsi was elected and set up his own cabinet. You know, he took over the judicial system. He took over the country, and basically it became more and more obvious that they were setting up what I suppose we could call an Islamic state, a kind of medieval revival of a medieval state. They wanted to have women veiled. They wanted to prevent people going on the beach in bathing suits. This kind of nonsense. Apart from many other things. I mean, you may have heard there were some of the more radical ones were speaking about covering the Sphinx with a cloth. Others were being even more aggressive and saying these monuments should be destroyed. So it really was a lot of nonsense. And thank goodness that the Egyptian people rose against this. And had they waited for the full term, it would have been impossible to dislodge these radicals. So this is what happened. Now, unfortunately, in the chaos that prevailed, the army had to step in, and had to step in a very strong way. And as you know, Curtis, I'm not one for violence and any form of oppression, but there was chaos in the street. There was an uprising by 12 million people in the street demanding that the army acts and remove this unacceptable government. So they've done so. Of course, there's been a reprisal. You may have heard of all this, and yesterday there was the first sign of a more aggressive opposition. They've tried to assassinate the Minister of the Interior unsuccessfully. But I think the only solution really is that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is really at the back of the Islamist movement, will be removed. Many of their leaders have been arrested, and that's it. you can't have in the 21st century, especially in Egypt, which is accustomed to a modern society, you can't have this medieval form of thinking. It's just out of the question. And so anyway, there you are. That's the latest. And I'm hoping that the roadmap that they've set will be implemented. I think they mean the so-called military-backed interim government means business. They will be going soon for a constitution referendum, after which there will be parliamentary election, and then hopefully sometime in spring they will have again fresh presidential election, and hopefully they'll have the right government to get Egypt back on track. So there you are.
Excellent, excellent. Because I mean, Egypt is precious to us. We can't have too much political unrest going on over there because it holds too much of our history. Now let's turn our attention to this tremendous book that you've just written, Robert, Imhotep the African, Architect of the Cosmos. Now, for many years, unfortunately, in the school system, the history of Imhotep isn't taught. I didn't learn of Imhotep until I was long gone from the school system. And in my estimation, Imhotep has not gotten his due in the history books, especially here in Western civilization. And when myself and many of the listeners began to study Imhotep, we were really taken back at the contributions that this great being has given to the world. We always heard of Galileo and Newton and all of that, but no one ever talked about Imhotep. And, there may be listeners out there right now that to this day may not be too familiar with Imhotep. So, let's get a brief background on this tremendous being and his contributions to what we're looking at today, ancient as well as modern society.
Yes. Well, I'm actually holding the book in my hand. Imhotep the African, Architect of the Cosmos, and as you rightly pointed out, it is co-authored by myself and Thomas Brophy, Dr. Thomas Brophy. Perhaps I should make a little introduction as to how Tom and I got together on this project. As you rightly pointed out, Tom and I co-authored a book 2 years ago called Black Genesis, which essentially explored the prehistoric origins of ancient Egypt. And I'm not going to go too much into that, but essentially it concluded by examining evidence that has been collated over the last 30 years, particularly in a site called Nabta Playa. You mentioned it earlier. And also evidence in what Egyptians call the Western Desert, which is really the part of the Sahara which is west of River Nile. We have identified there, well, to be honest, it wasn't us who identified a culture there. The story starts very early in 1974. I need to give this background. Do you mind?
Sure, go ahead, brother. Take as much time as you need.
Excellent. Well, let me start properly. In 1974, a research team formed by the University of Texas and the Academy of the Polish Institute formed an organization called the CPE, the Combined Prehistoric Expedition, and essentially their mission was to collate data in the area west of the Nile, particularly in the far south, adjacent to Abu Simbel and that kind of area, mainly because there was unfortunately a project which luckily has been shelved, but there was a project to irrigate this zone, and much of the prehistoric sites were going to be flooded. So that's how it started. And on one of their journeys, it's rather amusing. I'll tell the story because it's got this strange synchronistic ring about it. They were driving with their four-wheel drives back to Abu Simbel, which is the most distant town south in Egypt. They were in the desert, about 100 kilometers from Abu Simbel, and they stopped to have what they politely called a comfort break, meaning that they wanted to go to the toilet. And as they stepped out of the vehicle, they realized that they were in the middle of what clearly was a Stone Age or a prehistoric site, which they eventually called Nabta Playa. The strange thing about this research that was done there is because, well, mainly all of them were anthropologists, and they approached it from an anthropological type of research. It took about 20 years. I know it sounds strange but true. It took them about 20 years to finally say to themselves, well, you know, this is a bit strange. There are circles of stones, and there are stones that are in alignment. Maybe they have astronomical significance. So they brought in what we call an archaeoastronomer, a man who specializes in ancient astronomy, a fellow called Kim Manville from Boulder, Colorado. And the minute that they brought him there, he said, well, it's very obvious. I mean, these alignments, stone alignments and stone circles are clearly astronomically aligned. And they published their first findings in 1997, which was a huge sensation because they published first what they call the calendar circle. I've just put something on my Facebook, by the way, about this. They published the research on a very peculiar little circle, which they call the mini Stonehenge of the desert. To cut a long story short, because I want to move into Imhotep the African, what they found was that this calendar circle had solar alignment to the summer solstice, to the meridian, but the date of this circle placed it to about 2,000–3,000 years before Stonehenge and before the pyramid. This was an amazing revelation in itself. Excuse me. Later on, my colleague Tom Brophy got interested in this research and actually went to Nabta Playa. He went there long before I did. He went there in 2003, and luckily he did, because he had the good sense to remeasure all the position of the stones with his GPS instruments and took photographs. He even commissioned a satellite. Well, he didn't commission the satellite, but he asked one of the satellites, I think it was QuickBird, that transited the area, and asked them to take a couple of photographs. This was very lucky because, as you probably might have seen on my Facebook today, and in Black Genesis, unfortunately the site has been severely vandalized, and all the stones have now been removed to the Aswan Nubian Museum. So luckily we have a print, a fingerprint of the stones as they originally were, and from this a lot of information came out. What Tom discovered was that the stone circles also had stones within the circle that he identified to be representative of Orion's belt, which immediately rang a bell, and literally, because he called me up and said, "This is you got to hear this." I didn't know of him. He said, "I know your theories about Orion's belt and the pyramids. Well, we have now stones in the desert that are 3,000 years older than the pyramids that have the same astronomy. As for the alignment, there are many alignments of stones going in straight lines towards the north and the east, and these again were directed towards constellations that we thought were original to the pyramid builders. For example, the northern alignments of Nabta Playa are directed to the circumpolar stars, the Plough, and the central circumpolar stars, and the eastern alignments are directed to the star Sirius and the stars of Orion's belt. Now, for your listeners who are not familiar with this, this is exactly the astronomy that we find in the Great Pyramid, which has shafts pointing to those two directions, to the north, towards the circumpolar stars, and to Orion's belt and Sirius. So suddenly, the whole chronology of Egypt began to take a different view totally. We began to realize that what we thought was original to the pyramid builders was in fact practiced in the desert 3,000 years before. So the big question is, who was doing that? You know, who were the people who were doing that? I mean, we have their stones, but we didn't know who they were. But as things oddly happen in this kind of strange research, is 3 years later, after Brophy had investigated, I get another phone call. Can I carry on with this story?
Yes, please.
You have to interrupt me because you know me. I'm one of these non-stop. But it's fun. It's fun because I think your readers will appreciate the global view of this. I got a phone call from another old friend of mine, a fellow called Mark Borda. He called me from the island of Malta because he lives there, and he's another unusual man. I'm sure you read about him in Black Genesis, if you remember.
Yes, absolutely.
He's a self-made desert explorer, and in late 2007, he went to explore a very remote place called Jebel Uwainat. Now let me locate this for your listeners. If you look at a map of Egypt, and you look at the extreme southwest corner, where Egypt butts into Libya and Sudan, modern Libya and Sudan. This area is marked by a mountain region called Jebel Uwainat, which amazingly was not discovered till the 1920s. It's uninhabited, badly explored. Anyway, we knew long before that that those early explorers had seen rock art there, and Mark Borda, with an Egyptian desert explorer guide called Mahmoud Marai, decided to go there and see if they could find some more of these rock drawings. What they found was something else that stunned them and stunned me when he called me. What they found was pharaonic inscriptions that were from the Pyramid Age, roughly about 2300 BC. And these inscriptions state that the pharaohs sent envoys to meet their ancestors, and they called them the people of Yam and Techebet. And amazingly, these ancestors have left drawings there of themselves in rock art, in caves and various rock cavities that I myself went to visit, by the way, with Tom Brophy a year later. And lo and behold, we can actually see them. They were black skinned, hence the Black Genesis hypothesis. And what we know now is that these people who came down from Central Africa had moved there and had lived there when the desert was very fertile, had eventually migrated to places like Nabta Playa and set up the ceremonial sites that I've just described. And when the desert became super arid, they moved to the Nile Valley. And they are the instigator of the pharaonic civilization. There is no doubt at all now that the origin of the pharaonic civilization is a black African origin. I mean, I didn't have much doubt before, but this is the evidence, and it's all laid out in our book, Black Genesis. The big question is there a link between the very first architectural project that developed in Egypt, hence this book that we just wrote, Imhotep the African, with these black African prehistoric people that populated the Nile Valley. And that's where we come in with this new book. So I'm going to move now to Imhotep the African. We had, perhaps I should also mention that when we wrote Black Genesis, if you recall, I think I met you around that time.
Yes.
In 2011, was it?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Correct. Tom Brophy and I had been invited to speak at the second Nile Valley Conference in Atlanta. You may recall that the first Nile Valley Conference was some 20 years before, when they had the famous Egyptologist from Senegal, Diop, who instigated this idea that, of course, he was highly pillared at the time. Anyway, we went to this conference and we presented the evidence of that we had expounded in Black Genesis. And at the time, it occurred to us that many people were interested in the character of Imhotep, but nobody knew much about him. In fact, he's become a kind of cult figure in many modern and late mythologies. The Greek turned him into a god of medicine. He's even been the central character of Hollywood films, turned into the bad guy of ancient Egypt. But really, all these are speculative stories. There is absolutely nothing contemporary that was known about Imhotep. Nothing was written. And therefore, how do you get to the man? Clearly, one of the things we know for sure, and let me bring in this architectural project that is the centerpiece of our book, the famous step pyramid complex in Saqqara. Now, I'm one of those people who likes to describe things for listeners, because I know many people haven't been there, and it's nice to know. So let me put you in the scene. Can I do that?
Certainly.
Now, I don't know if you have been. Have you been there, Curtis?
Not yet. I'm hoping to go real soon.
Well, come with us.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, the Saqqara Step Pyramid Complex is the very first known architectural complex in the world, not just in Egypt. The very first designed project using hewn stone with an extraordinarily sophisticated form of architecture. So let me describe it. It is a huge rectangular compound with a boundary wall. I'll get to that later, because the boundary wall is one of the keys to understand this place. A gigantic boundary wall that is made of stone. Its height is about 9 meters, or 3 stories, a 3-story house. So it's a very, very high wall. It's got sides of about half a kilometer, 500 meters, and so 2 sides opposite to each other of 500 meters each, and the other sides to complete the rectangle are about 250 meters. So that is the contour, and the centerpiece of this complex is, of course, the famous step pyramid. It's a pyramid that measures about 60 meters high. It's got 6 tiers, probably a 7th one that has disappeared, which probably was an apex stone. And it is the oldest ever pyramid built in the world. Adjacent to the pyramid are many unusual structures. They've been called dummy architectural symbolic structures. They clearly are not designed. They're little stone buildings that were clearly not intended to be used. They're symbolic, and they're symbolic for a purpose, which I'll explain in a minute. There's about 20 of these, there is an enormous underground complex under the pyramid, which is roughly a total of about 2 kilometers of tunnel. You can really get lost there. Some of your listeners may have seen a show by our ex-minister Zahi Hawass called Chasing Mummies, who they filmed down there. It's an incredible place. And but when you do look at this place, you do look at the architecture, it's kind of baffling that the very first ever architectural project is so sophisticated. Beautiful design. Let me get back to the wall. Now, or let me just bring Imhotep in the scene, because for a long time, until 1926, nobody knew who had done this complex. There was no indications at all. There is no inscription. Now, according to legend, much later legend, it was said that Imhotep was the designer of this complex, but there was no hard proof. There was no smoking gun evidence until 1926, when a French archaeologist working with a British archaeologist discovered buried in the sand, they were still clearing the site, buried in the sand, the lower part of a statue. And those who may have access to my Facebook can see the picture. I've actually put it on my profile for those to see. It's now in a museum at Saqqara, at the entrance of the complex. Now this statue changed everything, because it gave us the name of Imhotep, clearing completely any doubts that he was the architect, but not just the architect. It gives his titles, and one of his titles is High Priest of Heliopolis, and that's where it becomes very interesting. I'll expound on this in a minute. And also on this bottom of the statue, this stone socle, is the name of the king to which Imhotep was his vizier, or his prime minister, if you like. And the name of the king is given as Netjerei-Het. It is what is known to Egyptologists as the Horus title name. The kings of Egypt regarded themselves as Horus kings. And the name actually means he who is divine. So here we have now for sure, since 1926, we know for sure that Imhotep was the man behind the project, the architect and designer and supervisor, and the high priest of Heliopolis, and we know the name of the king. Later on, much later, we managed, or other Egyptologists managed to find that the king first name, or rather given name, was Zoser. So you'll find in many textbooks that they mention King Zoser as being the owner of this complex. But in fact, this is much later. But there is no doubt now that we know who was the king and that Imhotep was his vizier. Now, combining the role of Imhotep as the architect of this project and knowing that he was the high priest of Heliopolis, that gave us an immense clue as to how to get to this man, how to understand him. Because the high priest of Heliopolis was essentially what today we would call a royal astronomer, or the astronomer royal, if you like, which still exists in England, for example. The Queen of England has her personal astronomer. There is one in Scotland as well. I had the pleasure to meet the Scottish one. He came to Egypt with us, John Brown. So we have here an astronomer, a royal astronomer, who is also an architect, and who is going to design a project intended for a very specific metaphysical function. This function is to build a machine, if you like, or a metaphysical machine, to ensure that the king returns back to his origin in the sky, to his ancestral origin. And you see where we're coming at, because...
Oh, yeah.
So, can I carry on?
Yes, please.
You have to interrupt me if you have other questions, because But I think
No.
it's kind of laying down the whole story, and I'm enjoying this. So cut me short if you wish.
Yes, carry on, brother.
Well, with all these clues, Tom Brophy and I began to scratch our head and say, wait a minute, we suspect that the origins, or we knew that the origins were from this black prehistoric people that built Nabta Playa. We knew that these people who had built Nabta Playa were clearly what today we would call astronomers or religious astronomers, call them what you like, because of the alignments of the stone. So here we had two links. So how could we link these two? Well, how could we read through the design of Imhotep? Now, my brother is sitting next to me here, and he's been listening very patiently, because he's an architect. And an architect, especially on a religious monument such as this one, with a very specific function, you can read him. You know how to understand his design. You can read him like a book. You can examine the symbolism of his design. You can examine the alignment. You can examine the shapes, the various structures he put, and begin to read them like a book. In other words, the Saqqara complex is a manual in stone, but an astronomical manual. And this is how Tom Brophy and I approach it. And it was very exciting because as we began to dig, literally, intellectually, into this design, we began to enter the mind of Imhotep. I feel like I know the man now. And let me now get into the details of it. I would like to bring my brother in later on, who will explain something to do with the Great Pyramid that is connected to this. So
Absolutely.
when time comes, I'll introduce him. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely, brother.
Excellent. So, here we go. I'll carry on. Well, the thing is that what we had worked out at Nabta Playa, as you have read and hopefully others will read in Imhotep the African, is that there is a date that is very clearly imprinted, tagged, if you like, in the astronomy of Nabta Playa. And that date is 6100 BC. It's a very interesting date for various reasons. I mean, it is corroborated with carbon dating. The anthropologists were there, managed to extract that date. It is corroborated by the alignment of the stone. We have shown this very clearly both in Black Genesis and in this new book, Imhotep the African. So we had a date. We have a date that seems to have been extremely important to whoever was there. These black-skinned people who were doing these ceremonial sites. So what does it mean? And could we somehow link this date with the necropolis or the complex of Imhotep at Saqqara? So we started getting into it. Now back to the most important and highly ignored by Egyptologists feature of this project, the boundary wall. It is perhaps the most incredibly architecturally project that was done in ancient Egypt. I'll explain why. Apart from its enormous size, collectively it measured something like 1.5 kilometers. So you can imagine a wall that surrounds this complex, which is 9 meters high, and if you go around it, you're going around 1.5 kilometers. But what is peculiar about this wall is the way it's been designed. It's got indentations, what we call panels, that were actually carved on situ. So you can imagine a flat wall, and then workers came and carved long vertical indentations that are about 20 centimeters wide and almost 8 meters long, and they are perfect. They are like they were cut by a machine. It's very difficult to imagine this done by hand. But having said this, the work must have been enormous because we've counted, let me give you the number, we've counted 1,460 of these protrusions and panels. Let me be more precise, 1,461 on one of the sides of the wall, and 1,459, that means two less, on the other side, and then the shorter side, to form the rectangle, have 360 of these indentations and protrusions each. Now let me tell you, to an astronomer, these numbers jump out of the complex. And I need to explain something very, very important here to do with the astronomy of the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians had devised a solar calendar very, very early in their civilization, probably in prehistoric times, and probably by the people who designed Nabta Playa, because, as I explained, we have a calendar circle which has solar alignment there. So it is very likely that the ancient prehistoric Egyptians, these black-skinned people, knew of the solar year and had devised a calendar. But this calendar was kept to 365 days deliberately without adjusting for the quarter year, or quarter day in the year. As we know, there is a little bit more than 365 and a little bit less than a quarter of a day, to be precise. So we adjust this now, today, with our modern Gregorian calendar, so that every 4 years we add a day, the so-called leap year, and we add a day, and we have a year of 366 days every 4 years, correct?
Correct.
Right. Which should ring a bell now, because we have two sides of this complex that have the value 366. We're beginning to see where we're getting at. But if you do not adjust, if you do not put that extra day every 4 years, the calendar will drift against the true astronomical year. And it will drift at a calculated rate of 1 day every 4 years, correct?
That's correct.
In other words, if you calculate its return back to its point of origin, it will take 1,461 years. Very simply, 4 times 365 and a quarter. So, the number 1,461 is known as the Zodiac cycle. Basically, it means that the Egyptians were using what later on the Greeks called the great year or the Platonic year. They had the solar year of 365 days, and then they had this huge cycle of 1,461 calculated cycles. And this is the measurement of one of the sides, 1,461 panels. So Imhotep was aware of this and placed it and incorporated it in his design. But here is the amazing thing, which Tom and I were astounded when we reasoned this out. Because, like I said, this is calculated, not observed. The Zodiac cycle, this long, huge cycle that the Egyptians knew, actually varies very slightly over the vast eons of time. So a Zodiac cycle is never the same as the other. It can be 1,460, it can be 1,458, but we have calculated, and this was corroborated by archaeoastronomers working in the 1950s as well, so we have a check on our calculation, that the Zodiac cycle that preceded Imhotep was 1,459 years. And this is the measurement that Imhotep incorporated in the other side of the boundary wall. So we have these two figures. That means Imhotep was not only aware of how to calculate the cycle, but he had received information of an observed cycle that occurred 1,459 years, began for 1,459 years before. This is astounding. It's really astounding. And now we come to the sides of the wall, 366, because we knew that, and Egyptologists are very familiar with this, we know that the ancient Egyptians had based their calendrical observation on a star, the star Sirius. And the star Sirius happened to rise at the time of the summer solstice, in the time when Imhotep designed the complex. And this star, which performs a cycle of 365 days, but if you observe it, you will see that it loses, like the solar cycle, a day. It has an extra day every 4 years. So it looks like the wall incorporates this mechanism of their calendar and the Zodiac cycle. Now, the star becomes very interesting because we know the name that Imhotep gave to the complex. He called it the star at the head of the sky. There's no doubt that the star that was considered to be ruling all the other stars was the star Sirius. So with this information, we began to try and reason out, wait a minute, what is he trying to tell us? What link is he trying to make with these Zodiac cycles? Now, there's something about Imhotep's title, which is contemporary, by the way, with his time, is that he was called the builder of Nechem. Now, let me explain this. His title, Imhotep, priest of Heliopolis, high priest of Heliopolis, I've just explained, and we've analyzed his function. But he has another title called Imhotep, builder of Nechem. Now, Nechem is an ancient site that Egyptologists also call Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt, in the extreme south of Egypt. And there we have managed to trace that Imhotep's father had lived there and was also an architect and probably designed a complex that much resembles the complex that Imhotep designed at Saqqara. It has the same boundary wall design and various other features. But what is interesting is that at Nechem we found physical evidence, potsherds and various other artifacts that belong to the people of the western deserts of Nabta Playa. So there you have the link. We have the link that they were there. They were there at that site. And I would wager, and that's what we've laid our hypothesis on, as you probably read in the conclusion of Imhotep the African, that more than likely either Imhotep or Imhotep's father was a descendant of these people, or that he got his knowledge of astronomy and architectural design, and particularly astronomy, from these people. So, where does this bring us with Imhotep? Was he also of the same ethnic origin? And I have to say, I mean, as you probably know from our book, we took a leap of faith here, because Imhotep clearly was very much trying to link us to that site of Nabta Playa. Let me tell you how it works now that you've heard all this numbers and astronomy. Can I carry on?
Yes, please.
Because that's important. In 1960, aerial photographs taken by the Egyptian army were examined by an Egyptologist, a fellow called Swelin. Unfortunately, committed suicide later for a reason that I will explain. It's very odd, a very odd story. He realized that when he examined these pictures and enhanced them and contrasted them using special liquids in those days, he was using film, realized that the Saqqara complex, the boundary wall which I described, was itself surrounded by a huge, what he called a moat, a kind of trench that was literally forming the same rectangular shape. Now, let me describe this, because unfortunately now it's been covered up. When Swelim went to examine this, he noticed in the picture, and he went to examine, he managed to excavate parts of it, an enormous project, about roughly 40 meters wide trench, 25 meters deep, going around this complex, forming roughly about 3 kilometers of trench, forming a perfect rectangle. What he realized, but didn't expand on it, was that Imhotep had used, when he placed his boundary wall and the alignment of the complex, he used the alignment that pre-existed with this so-called moat, this trench. This trench has now been dated to the first dynasty, around 3100 BC, which means that Imhotep not only was aware of this, but kept the original alignment, and then added his boundary walls with the astronomy that I've just described. So Brophy and I said, wait a minute, we have a date of 3100 BC now, which is the original alignment of this complex. Imhotep designed his wall and put two Sothic cycles, 1459 and 1461. Let's add these two figures together. Let's see what we get. And lo and behold, we get the value of approximately 6100 BC, the date that is tagged at Nabta Playa. So is Imhotep telling us that the origins, the origins of the Egyptian race comes from there? Well, I suspect it does. I mean, we've taken the reading up to that. And we're hoping that other breakthroughs will allow us to confirm this anthropologically and eventually find these people, because the odd thing about the Nabta Playa people, that we see their images in the southwest, in those caves, we haven't yet found their physical bones, their physical tombs. It's quite extraordinary. We have not yet found these people. So I'm sure they're there, because when you go in the Western Desert, it's very clear that there must have been not just thousands of them, but probably in the hundreds of thousands, because you find artifacts all over the place. And they moved around. They navigated using the stars, moving from one side to the other. So it was a very large population. Amazingly, because mainly the Egyptologists have not been interested so far, we have not found yet their physical evidence. So the next step, of course, when all this hullabaloo in Egypt comes down, Tom Brophy and I are hoping, with also the removal of our famous ex-minister Zahi Hawass, who was obstructing us from doing further research, we're hoping to proceed there and try and find them. So but we're very, very convinced. We're very convinced, I must say, that we have put together as much as we can this puzzle, and as much as we can to bring out the personality of this man. We're dealing with a genius. We're dealing with a like you said at the beginning, we're dealing with the Da Vinci of his time. We're dealing with a Newton, with a Galileo, a man who clearly was a very accomplished astronomer, was a very accomplished architect, and also a very accomplished philosopher, because he would not have been high priest of Heliopolis without that kind of quality. High initiate, the highest initiate of his time. And hence not surprising that he was venerated and deified in later times. So there we are. That's the full story. You've got to ask me some more questions.
Yes, well, when we talk about Imhotep, and I'm so glad that people like yourself, and others are bringing this type of information to the forefront. Also, Dr. Ashra Kwesi, has done extensive work on Imhotep as well. Are you familiar with Dr. Ashra Kwesi?
I am familiar, yes. And
yes.
We're going to add him. Some of his work is going to appear in this next book I'm doing with Ahmed Osman.
Oh yes, he's done extraordinary work with him as well. With regard to the research on Imhotep. what are your opinions on the work that Dr. Kwesi has done with Imhotep as well? Because when I look at his work and I look at your work, it's like I'm reading the works of two giants with regard to Egypt and its history.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't want to reveal too much because I have this kind of deals with my publishers not to talk too much about books that haven't been yet written. But I fully respect his work and will be using a lot of his ideas because this book that I'm doing called Egypt Unveiled, let me describe this a bit because I think you'll be interested. What we have been doing so far is not just bringing to light the origins of the Egyptian civilization. Black Genesis has broken the ice here, if I can use that expression, has opened up the subject. And we're very pleased in the sense that it's becoming now a common consensus among most Egyptologists and many of the anthropologists. So I think there is no question at all now that the general opinion is that Egypt's origin, in terms of ethnic origin, comes from these people that I described earlier in the interview. These the star people of the desert, if you want to call them, the black-skinned star people of the desert. Having said this, and Imhotep the African tries to bring in a personality because every civilization has their great men, and Imhotep is one of them. Not just for the Egyptian civilization, but I think as a world genius coming in the ranks of the like we said, of Da Vinci and Galileo and so forth. But what we have been thinking, particularly Ahmed Osman and I, is that especially with the turmoil that is going on in Egypt, all this presents us with a model that was almost perfect in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians from the prehistoric times to the invasion later of the Greeks and the Romans lived in almost perfect harmony. They were in total harmony with their environment. And the reason they were in harmony was because of people like Imhotep that were high priest of Heliopolis and had devised a system, a social system, which they called Mat. And the social system was based on observation of nature and adapting the society to blend and integrate with the natural cycles and morphology of their country. In other words, that they sustain themselves in harmony with the rhythm of their own land, which is something that we today have lost completely. So in many ways, there is a philosophical social study to do here, to bring into light this model. I call it the model, a bit like astrophysics called models of the cosmos. We have a model of civilization that could be extremely useful today. And it is a model that I strongly believe was devised by Imhotep, a model that worked perfectly with very little disturbance for a people for 3,000 years. And when this model, unfortunately, was badly disturbed and eventually removed, we see what happened. I mean, the chaos that we see today is the product of 2,000 years of confusion after the pharaonic civilization was extinguished. But the beauty of it is that although the civilization went away, the idea is still there. And this is what we're trying to do with various books and research of others, and we will expound this in our new book. I want to draw in here at this stage, because I promised to do that, to introduce my brother. Do you mind if I do that?
Oh, please do. We look forward to hearing his information.
Yes, because I believe, and I have brought this idea out again in this new book I'm doing, that Imhotep was still alive when King Khufu began to design his pyramid, the Great Pyramid. mainly because we see many of the astronomical features that are incorporated at Saqqara in the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is, of course, the centerpiece of all of ancient architecture in the world. And my brother and I have been very, very involved with this monument. As you know, many of my books deal with the astronomy of Giza, particularly with the so-called correlation that I presented in the early 90s. But my brother Jean-Paul has been studying the mathematics of this monument, the architecture and mathematics of this monument. And let me give you a little preamble so that he can pick up from there. Well, first to introduce him, Jean-Paul is, well, he's 7. He's 7 years older than me. He corrected me here. We're very good friends. We argue a lot, but that's what brothers do. And, yes, and we, of course, we both lived in Egypt for a long time. We lived 20 years in Egypt in our youth, and we go to Egypt, well, 2 or 3 times a year when we can, and we know these sites very, very well. And he has taken a great interest. I've taken an interest in the astronomy, published my books, and he has taken a great interest in the architecture, and particularly the design, the numerical design of the monument. And something has turned up lately, which I was very involved over the last 15 years, was these famous shafts. As you well know, these shafts in the Great Pyramid, there are shafts emanating from the king's chamber that head to the outside of the monument. They're at an angle, and the southern shafts point to Orion's belt, hence the link with Orion's belt. And the northern shafts point to the circumpolar stars, which earlier I said is the same astronomy that we find at Nabta Playa, and by the way, also at Saqqara. Which I don't want to go into, but those who will read the book will see that the Saqqara complex of Imhotep uses these stars, particularly the star Sirius and the circumpolar stars, to lock the necropolis at what they consider to be the origin date. But now coming back to the Great Pyramid, as you know, in 1993 a door was found at the end of the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. And for a long time, Dr. Hawat has prevented any further research. But eventually, in 2002, National Geographic was allowed to perforate a little hole and insert a fiber optic camera. And what they came up with was they realized there was a second door about half a meter away from the original Gantenbrink door. Now, this stayed on a stalemate for until 2011, just before the revolution broke. And then another team managed to put a fiber optic camera in there. Now remember that this door is 60 meters inside the shaft, so you have to send whatever you're going to send up there with a mechanized machine, miniature robot. And they managed to insert a fiber optic camera this time that could bend all around the little cavity that between these two doors and produced images. And I leave it here because my brother will describe them. We got a big surprise, and he'll tell you all about it. Here, I'll pass you on to Jean-Paul Bauval, the architect and brother of myself.
Welcome, Jean-Paul.
Hi. Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
Okay, I won't talk as much as Robert, but I'll try and be a good speaker. Anyway, what he told you about this camera that went and photographed the inside of this little chamber on top of what we call the Gantenbrink door at the end of the southern shaft was a bit of red graffiti on the floor, and there have been many different thinkings about its solutions, and everybody has proposed different things. One day, luckily, I fell upon an information that was done by an Italian mathematician and researcher whom I don't know the name because he goes under a pseudonym, and he came up with the idea that maybe this graffiti represented numbers, and he mentioned the number 121 as he saw it. Of course, this rang a bell with me because 121 is the square root of 11 times 11, that's 121, so it's 11 squared. And the number 11 has come up many, many times in the proportions of the pyramid in its design. Now, we know, and it's been known for a long time, that the number 11 was a horizontal number and 14 was a vertical number, giving us the inclination of the pyramid, which englobes P and phi, phi being 1.618, which is a proportion that is very, very old. Now, what has happened is that through this number 11, I have developed, if you want, a series of drawings which reproduce this number horizontally, and using the 14 vertical feature, I have found out that there are a lot of connections in this design. So it is, to me at least, clear that whoever designed this, Imhotep or others on it, knew about these proportions and kept on repeating these proportions, like Robert examined in his Imhotep Zoser complex. These numbers keep on coming up. And it is a way of designing. It's like a modern architect uses a module, whatever you want, of 2 feet, 3 feet, and repeats itself. And what happens is that this number of 11 of this Italian mathematician gave is repeated very, very, very often in this.
Yeah, I'm trying to buy gin because you got me excited here. Can I? Get used to us. We're a bit like that. Yeah, John Paul has been in his office for the last 2 months or the whole summer because he's very excited about what's coming out of this. I'm the writer, as you know, so I'm a bit more verbose and more poetic about all this.
Yeah, I'm much more mathematical.
He's strictly a technician here.
I see.
But what's coming out, as he explained to me, and we'll be presenting this, by the way, at a conference in Italy in November, is that, as suspected previously by many, but there's a lot of information coming out, is that this monument seems to be having, by using this code, if you like, this 11 code, this 14 code, it's a kind of code, seems to be having numbers that are associated to our planet.
Exactly.
Its diameter, its circumference, its latitude, its position. It's very, very strange. Now, one of the things that we have known for a long, long time is that the pyramid itself is, although it's a pyramid, when you compare its ratio of height and the circumference of its base, represents a hemisphere. In other words, it's a miniature design, if you like, symbolically, of a hemisphere, which above it is the hemisphere of the sky, hence the astronomy that we keep butting in all the time. So there seems to be some kind of universal language that they're using, which incorporates mathematics and astronomy.
Correct.
Jean Paul shouting correct here. I'm saying this because, although reluctantly I've been opening up in this direction, if you use astronomy and mathematics as a form of expression, then you are speaking in what you could call a universal language. Right. Saying correct again. The language that is understood by any generation, anywhere on this planet, and even beyond. In other words, Imhotep and the design of the Great Pyramid, who probably were inspired or even taught by Imhotep, was speaking a language that is universal, which is what we find at Nabta Playa, which means that whoever designed Nabta Playa was aware that you could communicate across time and space using this astronomical come mathematical form of expression, which means, of course, that they were extremely sophisticated. So we're not dealing with simply prehistoric people who align stones towards the rising of stars and the rising of the sun. We're dealing with people who are trying to communicate. And they understood from very early stages that the way to communicate across any distance and across any time factor is through this language. So this is the new approach now, the new approach to try and read these monuments. And Imhotep has left us a book. I mean, the Saqqara complex.
A book in stone.
That's right, a book in stone. That's a good metaphor, Jean-Paul. So that's what we have there. And this is why this man becomes extremely important, because he's not just a genius of his time. He's trying to, he has memorialized, if you like, he has written his opus of something very important that we're beginning to skim and slowly begin to censor. It's something to do with the origin of civilization. And he's left it there for us to read. The problem is that those who have been reading it so far were not using this language. You know, there were Egyptologists, anthropologists who look at artifacts and potsherds and so forth, and suddenly come people like Thomas Brophy and like my brother Jean-Paul and myself and begin to say, hey, wait a minute, we're dealing with something else here. We're dealing with something that has to be read with this universal language. And this is, these two books, I'm not claiming that it's the all and be all, by the way, as I've said many times on the interviews. There's still a lot of work to do, but we've opened up the way here. There is a new Egyptology, if you like, that needs to take shape, and we're pioneering it. We need to read those people, particularly what the legacy of Imhotep. This is why this man is so important, through this form of investigation. So my brother keeps rubbing my shoulder. He wants to say something. We're kind of huddled on the sofa together. Yeah, you want?
What I would like to say is that it took us a very, very long time to come to this. In other words, it's been probably about 5,000 years from now, say 3000 BC. What has happened is that during that time, and it's only now that we have involved astronomy, high mathematics, geometry, etc., into dealing with this project, these things. We have never done it before. In other words, what was done 40, 50, 60 years ago, and books written about it, did not deal with astronomy like my brother Robert is very interested in, Tom, and the mathematics of it. So it took us a long, long time to come to this point. Probably we're going to accelerate now, and the findings will be, hopefully, more and more correct from now on.
Yeah, I should say, you know, not to blow our trumpets. Is that the right expression? Blowing our trumpets, yes. I should say that there's been many others. I mean, Jean-Paul and I are part of a new breed of researchers, and I include, of course, Thomas Brophy, who has done a lot of work on these particular issues, and people like Graham Hancock, who I've written books with, and of course, let's not forget the geologist Robert Schoch and John Webb. We know each other very well. We meet very often. We've done conferences together and so forth, and we're all realizing that there has been a misunderstanding, a great misunderstanding, because unfortunately these monuments, these legacies from such geniuses as Imhotep were handled in modern times by people who came from the humanities. Now, I have nothing wrong against humanities. In fact, I've written a whole book which will come out in March called The Vatican Heresy, which is something else I'll talk to you hopefully in another interview.
Oh, yes.
But, yeah, that's a fun book because it deals with ancient Egypt, believe it or not, although the title implies something else. The problem with humanists, well, let me give you a kind of allegory here. It's a bit like asking an artist to explain a balance sheet. You know, you're just not going to get it. You need to have the right man with the right mental approach and knowing numbers to understand what a balance sheet is. So this is the problem. So humanists who have taken possession of these monuments and this civilization have explained it through the humanist eyes. Now, there's not all good works, the translated text, and so forth, but they've been not only ignoring this what we call the universal language, the mathematics and astronomy, which is very obviously incorporated in these monuments, but they've actually, some of them have obstructed the research. They felt very uncomfortable with it. They didn't want to look into it, partly because they didn't understand it, and partly because they saw us as some sort of new age people coming in and talking about what they believe was astrology and that sort. That's not the case at all. There's hard sciences that are being applied here. The mathematics, astronomy, and geology, by the way, brought in by Robert Schoch. And these are the three sciences that are there, which were used by Imhotep, because Imhotep built in stone. Imhotep quarried stone. This is geology. He didn't, and he used astronomy, and he used mathematics. So this is, we're in the same kind of mental frame as Imhotep, in a sense, all of us put together. He was a sort of Renaissance man using all these knowledge at once, and we're trying to incorporate this by teaming up and forming a kind of unit that can read his opus. So this is the very exciting thing. This is the direction we're moving. As for the physical evidence that we hope will come through, and there's been much already, Nabta Playa being one, is for when all this mess comes down in Egypt, which I hope within the next 6-7 months, when they have presidential elections, we'll be allowed to re-explore the Western Desert. I want to get, of course, Brophy, Robert Schoch, because we need that kind of team, my brother as well. So in other words, to have that kind of multi-facet team that brings in mathematics, astronomy, geology, and also to have the backing, and I'm thinking very seriously, I'll be talking to them soon when I'm in the States, I hope, of the University of the District of Columbia, because I've made very good friends there, and as you probably know, I'm very close contact with Tony Browder.
Oh yes, another giant.
Another giant.
Yes, indeed. And
yes.
as we wind down, you've done an excellent job, in explaining Imhotep, with regard to the physical structures that he was involved in. Just give us some insight into how can I put this? The spiritual side of Imhotep, his mental state, because obviously for him to have contributed so much to ancient as well as modern society, this is a being that obviously had to be at a very, very high level of consciousness.
Absolutely, and there's no doubt about this at all. I mean, you're dealing with one of the very early and probably the most famous of his contemporary time, high priest of Heliopolis. You got to realize what this means. The king would appoint a man to be at the head of the religious and spiritual direction of Egypt. The high priest of Heliopolis was akin to the king. Indeed, the king consulted the high priest of Heliopolis on a daily basis, and the reason he did so is that the high priest of Heliopolis, in this case Imhotep, was interpreting through his insight and observation the activities of the world, literally. He would observe the sky every night. He would observe the activities on the land. Now, it may sound a bit sort of strange to us, but a high initiate of this caliber was so tuned and so highly initiated that he could combine the cosmic environment that he observed with the activities on the ground to create a kind of social system which again I describe as being Mat, the so-called cosmic order of justice and order that Egypt based itself upon, a sort of 10 commandments, if you like, of the land of Egypt. But they were based on the natural observation and the insight, the spiritual insight of a man like Imhotep. So we have there a man who was not only an architect and an astronomer, but he was also a highly spiritually, highly initiated individual on which the whole social system of Egypt and its governance depended on. So, an extraordinary character. You know, we talk about people like Pythagoras, we talk about people like Galileo. I've written a lot about Galileo, by the way, in my next book, The Vatican Heresy, because I've been very interested in these kind of characters that not only were geniuses, but were deep thinkers and understood something that perhaps we modern people need to understand again, to reform ourselves again, is that we don't simply belong to a place on this planet. We are part of a cosmic environment that regulates, by the way, our planet. Our planet is in motion. Our planet is going around the sun, around the star. It revolves on its axis. It performs the so-called precessional movement. It is itself a machine which regulates life on Earth, and these individuals, like Imhotep, particularly Imhotep, associated themselves to try and understand how human society must be integrated to this machine that we live on. To be out of sync with it is a disaster, and this is why we're writing this book with Ahmed Osman, is that look what's happening in Egypt. They're totally out of sync, completely. They've gone off the track completely, and sadly, I think our modern Western societies as well. We need to think in terms of how ancient Egyptians, and particularly individuals like Imhotep, set out the social system to create a system that harmonizes us with the natural activities of our planet, rather than alienate us and be indifferent to it, and worse, be destructive to it. So this is the man that we're dealing with. He's a jewel, if you like, of ancient history, and we need to bring him out properly. And this is the first step to read him, because I believe that such a man will be among the greats, but he will be the ancient light that will again be revived once we understand his true message and how he passed on this knowledge through his stone opus that is at Saqqara. So, yeah, we're at an early stage here, but as you can sense the excitement in our voices, we feel that we're beginning to get there, and we ourselves, by the way. Can I complete with this nice statement that I always like to make? We have changed. By studying this individual, by studying him and understanding the project that he did and the messages that he tried to incorporate and the spiritual essence of his social systems that existed, by getting into that. Now, luckily, we have material. We have the pyramid texts, we have the monuments themselves, we have the land still performing the same activity. We have the flooding of the Nile that's still there. We literally have the environment that is still there. And by doing that, and by getting into that through the years, we begin to realize that we ourselves are thinking in a manner that previously was not there. We're thinking, and I'll say that famous phrase that I say, we're thinking as cosmic man. And we're thinking as cosmic individuals. We're cosmopolitan. We are cosmopolitans on this planet. We're not Americans, we're not Italians, we're not Syrians, very much spoken about these days. We are cosmopolitans, and once we reawaken that sense, and how this cosmic law that Imhotep applied and was applied for 3,000 years in Egypt, once we understand it and reform ourselves with it, we'll begin to see ourselves as all parts of one singular place, our planet, and we belong to a cosmic environment. This is the way forward. This is the way forward. And amazingly, this man has left us his book, if you like. It's there. And Tom Brophy and I are beginning to open the first pages. How do you like that for poetry?
Oh, yes, that was great. Wow.
We open the first pages. There you are. And we invite others because we can't do it alone. I mean, Imhotep the African, I must say, it's not an easy book to read, as you probably realize. It demands effort. But it's worth the effort because we hope to inspire people who will take on the gauntlet, will take on the torch and take it further. It will take time, but I'm convinced this is the way forward, to understand this ancient civilization and to recreate, revive, resurrect, if you like, the old system, which will be very useful for us today. There is a mental state that was prevalent in those times, and Imhotep was one of the main proponents. That is very much we're very much in dire need today. We need to reinstate this cosmic vision that sustained Egypt for 3,000 years, and hopefully will sustain our civilization that is now heading for an Armageddon if it's not careful. So I'd like to end on these words. How are we doing on time?
Oh, yes. As we wind down, that wonderful. We want to, thank you so much, you and Jean-Paul, your dear brother there, for sharing this tremendous information with us. And as we wind down, Robert, please let us know where we can acquire this tremendous book and any other, any tours to Egypt you may have coming, or any lectures, or any information you wish to share with the family.
I do. Well, first, Imhotep the African has been launched on the 1st of September. It is, of course, available on Amazon. It is available in bookshops. The next book that will be coming out is a book I've written with two Italian authors. It's called The Vatican Heresy. Very interesting book, and let not the title mislead you, although it is dealing with an extraordinary moment in history of the Catholic Church. It links up back to ancient Egypt. It's a very interesting book. I loved writing this book. It will come out in March. Now, for more closer things, there is, of course, all of my books that can be found on my website, www.robertbauval.co.uk. .co.uk and not .com. So you'll find all my books there. There is a conference coming up in the States in October called the Paradigm Conference. There will be myself. I think Robert Schoch is also invited, and various others. It is in Minneapolis on the, let me get this right. Well, Google it, please. You'll find it on internet and on my Facebook, and it's advertised there. Many away from you, of course, from the States. There is many conferences coming up in this part of the world. A major conference in England for those listeners who might be in Europe. A major conference in England on the 16th of November, given by my colleague Andrew Collins. There is Graham Hancock and myself that will appear. It's in London. Frankly, I forgot the title, but again, Google it. There is also a major conference in Italy, in Trieste, a few weeks later in November, where my brother and I and many other researchers will be participating on the 30th of November. But again, it's advertised on my Facebook. So you can find all the information there. A lot of activity. I understand that my colleague Graham Hancock are moving this week to Turkey because, as you know, there is a great excitement with the Göbekli Tepe site, which we're now beginning to realize is part of this vast prehistoric civilization that we think existed linked to the Nabta Playa. So he's there at the moment, or he will be there in the next few days with the various other authors. So it's all go. We're having a lot of fun, Curtis. Still going strong at the age of 65.
And we hope you see 65 more years because we need you, brother.
No, I hope not that much, but a few decades more would do it fine.
You know, not just coming from myself, but coming from the entire family of Robert and John Paul, we want to thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your information with us here on Occult Science Radio today. I mean, like I said, Robert, I'm already planning you and your brother's next visit. You know, I can hardly wait for the next book because we know that book is going to be just as educational and informative as all your previous works.
Well, let's hope, by the way, I forgot to say this, but let's hope that we do find Imhotep himself. There's been a great excitement, and I leave for people to read this in the book. You'll find this in the last chapter, that there is a tomb that has been found in Saqqara that is very promising. It's not been explored yet because of the revolution, that indicates very strongly that it might be the tomb of Imhotep. So, wow, we may find the man. And what a thrill that would be.
Oh,
so there you are. I leave you with this thought.
Thank you so much, my beloved brother. Thank you as well, Jean Paul. Be well, and we're all looking forward to your next visit.
Thank you, Curtis.
It was a pleasure, Curtis. It's always nice talking on your show.
Always. Peace and be well, brothers.
Same to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. And we also want to thank you as well, beloved family out there, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today on Occult Science Radio. Please look for the Occult Network on Facebook. Yes, we have a Facebook page. You also have a YouTube page and a Twitter page and a LinkedIn page as well. You know, you could also find me on LinkedIn. Don't forget to find me on Facebook as well. Curtis Illuminated One Davis, and please visit theoccultnetwork.com as well as look for the Occult Network on Roku.com. So we have a lot of exciting things coming up, so stay tuned. And with that, beloved family, as I always say in closing, peace, love, and power, and please walk with strength. I love you all. Peace.
Wake up! 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 Wake up!